Is the baby boomer generation a selfish generation, seriously lacking in powers of perspective and resilience? That is the perhaps slightly controversial topic that I want to talk about today in today's video. So let me say from the outset, this is clearly a generalization, and whilst I'm going to give you my thoughts, I appreciate and acknowledge that this is what I'm about to say is clearly not representative of everybody in this demographic, in this age group, and that there are many exceptions to what I'm saying. And indeed, this is only my opinion, and there may be others who think completely differently. So, the baby boomer generation, born after the silent generation, those who endured World War II, and born before Generation X, the baby boomer generation, generally regarded as the luckiest generation ever to have lived. But what strikes me primarily is the fact that the people who today are in the 60s and 70s, they are the sons and daughters of the wartime generation, many of whom fell in World War II. Of course, the wartime generation who individually and collectively took on the dark forces of fascism in Europe and won, and who resultingly were lauded, rightly so, as heroes. I remember speaking to my two nanas. I never met one of my granddads, and my other granddad died before I was too young to learn about World War II. But they both fought in World War II, one in North Africa and one in France. One of them was actually at Dunkirk. But I did speak to my two nanas, and they told me enough for me to be able to get a sense, to try to get a sense of exactly the feat that they accomplished collectively as communities and as a nation to defeat the forces of evil. And they were both very modest, very humble, literally saw it as their duty, which in many ways, of course, it was. But that was the scale of it to them. It was their duty, and they did what had to be done, which is awe-inspiring when you consider what it was that they did have to do. Living in danger every day for what, 5 years, 6 years, making huge sacrifices, going hungry, you know, sheltering under tables as the bombs rain down, you know, on my home city of Liverpool, which was one of the worst affected cities during the Blitz. And that's not getting into what my granddad had to deal with out there fighting. So what I find strange is why their sons and daughters seem to be so careless about their freedoms, seem to be so incredibly naive, and also selfish. And let me say again, I am generalizing, but when you're creating content about society and commenting on society, you can't do so without generalizing. So I just want to reinforce that point again, that I am by no means applying this to everybody. I'm not. But I do find it staggering. I was in Wales last week. They have different rules over there with regard to the masks and things. So I came back, and on Saturday, I was back in England on Saturday. I went to the supermarket, and it was depressing. 75, at least 75 to 80% of people, I would say, were wearing masks. But all in that age group were. And also the place I went to, Ormskirk, the general demographic there is an older one anyway. So most of the customers or a lot of the customers are of that age group. And I'm looking around and thinking, what exactly has happened to your generation? Why? After you've had it so good, just why is it that you are seemingly still expectant of the state to protect you, but younger generations to protect you? Then the question is, have you really got things into perspective about what it is that the threat is? And then it's the naivety element to things as well. Now, I've commented before about it a couple of days ago about, on the flip side of this generation was the generation that rebuilt the country after World War II, and it did, and absolutely full credit to them for that. But let's take a step back and examine the last few decades since the end of World War II. There was the huge social and economic damage. After World War II, there was food rationing that continued into the 50s. But generally speaking, a little bit of some social instability in the 70s, some significant social instability in the 70s, some financial difficulties in the 80s. But let's step back and think, well, okay, in the grand scheme of human civilization, this generation, anyone born after World War II, undoubtedly, without a shred of doubt, certainly in this country, luckiest generation ever. No major social upheaval, really. No flood, famine or disease. No pandemic, no serious pandemic. No dictatorship. No war, no tyranny. No real threat of terrorism. They did have abundant employment, jobs for life, many perks associated with employment, the advent of cheap travel, so holidays, very, very significant pensions, ability to buy property and to invest. All the time, relatively free from any threat, from any existential threat. So whilst they have to take a lot of credit for building that society, I believe they also have to take a lot of criticism for their seeming, and I do use the word seeming, and it is my perception on things, for their seeming weaknesses that are clearly on display and have been in the last 18 months. Why are there so many of them, of the older generation? And I'm talking specifically 60s and 70s, not older here, not the generation who were older than that, who were in the war. Many of whom have been treated very, very unfairly. I'm not going to go into that because I've done it all before, and I'll get censored by YouTube again. But those who've had the jobs for life, who might be retired, probably who are retired, big fat pensions, etc. Maybe they got the second homes, the big houses with the back gardens. Well, it's okay. Lockdown's okay, isn't it? For them. You know, there is no impending financial collapse or impending financial ruin for them. They've paid off their mortgage. They're comfortable. They can order whatever they want to the door. you know, sip their wine in the lovely weather in the back garden, this kind of thing. But why, oh why, oh why, do so many of them seem to think it's acceptable for children to have to make the sacrifice for them? And not just children, but everybody who's younger than them. I feel particularly sorry for those in the 18 to 25 year group, but it's all of us, isn't it? Why? Why do I not see enough evidence of enough of them saying, no, we've had it good? You know, if this is a threat that needs to be dealt with, then we're prepared to accept that little bit of risk associated with the threat. We don't expect, and indeed we are shocked and appalled by the fact that children haven't been going to school. The pubs and nightclubs have been shut, that students have been having to do online learning and haven't been able to go and socialise with their friends at universities. They should. This kind of thing. I have been and continue to be shocked by it. I am. And the other element to it is, I think, and again, it's only my perception, that the most kind of switched on to what's going on at the moment. When I say switched on, you know what I mean, is the age group 35 to 55. And I'm not just saying that because I'm in that age group myself. I genuinely do think, I come back to the older generation and the selfishness and the ignorance and the naivety of many of them. And I think the younger generation as well, there is at least some evidence of me to suggest that that's a broken generation that doesn't quite know how to think for itself, and that is browbeaten. Although not as bad as some would have you believe. I think the most switched on generation is the generation that I'm in, whether that's something to do with the fact that now we've seen the good times and the bad times, we can clearly see it. Whether it's something to do with the fact that we do remember the pre-digital age, we remember what life was like pre-internet. And possibly something to do with the fact that the mainstream media has become such a source of manipulation, fear and lies that we've just seen it. So we've become a little bit more cynical, skeptical. And again, I just want to say that that is a generalisation about that generation as well, because there are far too many in my generation, in my age group, let's call it pathetic behaviour that is on display, particularly from men still. So, but I do think the 35 to 55 year age group is maybe the most switched on. Back to the older generation. I totally understand why they're so trusting. I use the word naive because if there's one or if there are two entities that you should take what they say with a pinch of salt, of course, what are they? Government and media. Now I do get though that this generation that built these successful societies that are now destroying themselves, largely in part due to the acquiescence and the selfishness of the generation that built it in the first place. But I do get that they grew up trusting government, trusting media, and I would suggest that was something to do with the fact that things were easier for them. And I want to say as well, when I say easier, again, when set amongst previous generations going right back to the year dot, undoubtedly, yes. I'm not saying life is easy for people, but I'm saying when compared. So, because of the reason that things were easier for them, maybe they did have that trust. Well, quite clearly they did have that trust. The government genuinely does want to look after people. The media would never ever tell a lie. It would only ever report the truth. Now this is what the baby boomer generation, I think genuinely thinks. Now, of course, governments are never benevolent. They'll become malevolent once they get too much power. And the one time in their lives the government has ended up with way too much power was in March 2020. Yeah, I think that in the minds of many, particularly in that generation, the government wants to look after us. It doesn't work like that, does it? It doesn't work like that. Which then calls into question, why then? With considering the fact that they were the sons and daughters of the wartime generation, why do they not know that? Why did they not spot the danger of giving a government too much power? Why were they so naive to think that tyranny would never visit these shores? That tyranny would never be an imposter on their lives and all of our lives? Why? And why you can still have some of them still not see it? So I want to know, after surely hearing the stories and learning about it in school, what happened, the instability in Europe, the 1930s, and then what happened with World War II, that their parents won for the Allies. Why? Were they not more on guard? I don't get it. Someone tell me the answer to this. Now, if there are any people who are watching this video in this age group I'm talking about, please give me your thoughts. Whether you agree or disagree, and feel free to disagree, please. Like I say, this is only my perception. And of course, part of the whole divide and conquer thing is pitting various generations against each other, and I would never want to get involved in that at all. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of why society has allowed this to happen. And we are a society with tens of millions of older people who have a real stake in society. They have more financial clout than the rest of us. I would suggest they have more of a say in how society goes than any other generation. I want to know whether, if there is anyone, whether you think what I'm saying is, am I right, am I partially right, or am I being completely unfair? Let me know. It seems to be a generation to me that hasn't been taught how to think. I've spoken before about how the Western educational system has failed or succeeded, in whichever way you look at it. But there seems to be a real lack of critical thinking in that particular age group. And again, that's going to be something to do with the fact that I would suggest the truth, the conduit to truth, is via the newspapers, whichever newspaper they read, and via the BBC. But I find it intriguing and fascinating, as well as frustrating, how it's proof to me how when times are good, you can build and create and sustain a pretty well high functioning society. But when times turn and they become bad, well, what's the reasons for that, and how are the characters who've helped to build that society, how are they going to react? And the old saying comes to mind: hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. We're in the hard times part of that cycle now, so now it's all about who are the strong men and women. There's incidentally more strong women than men out there, let me say that, in my opinion. Anyway, do let me know. I've been meaning to do this video for a while, and I've held off because I wanted to make sure, I wanted to have enough evidence. When I say evidence, enough observational evidence. I wanted to have ensured that I had taken stock to a significant degree in order to feel confident to do this video. Like I say, when I saw that in Morrison's Saturday, I didn't even know what day it is. Tuesday today, innit? Saturday. It was kind of like the final confirmation that yeah, this generation, it's lacking in resilience, it's lacking in perspective, and it's selfish. A large part of it are anyway. So, bit of a controversial one for you there today. Do let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. Share this video with anyone you think may have something to say about what I've said. Tell them to feel free to disagree. And I'm looking forward to seeing your comments on this. I may be shot down in flames, but that's okay. That's what it's all about, innit? Alright then. I will speak to you all very soon. Bye bye.